and loving horror stuff like we all do.
Yes. See, Greg has probably the most storied history with George, and the zombie genre as a whole. Greg, there's not much more you could do in the zombie subgenre.
No, I came up with a new idea.
Did you?
So we just finished shooting season 4 of Creepshow.
Yeah, baby.
There's one episode I'm going to tell you guys about because it makes me so happy. So, George loved 3D stuff. George was a big, wanted to do a 3D movie. I think he wanted to do Creature of Black. We do it in 3D at one point.
Yes.
So we came up with an idea called George Romero in 3D. And it's about these two people named Martin and Don, who are working in a bookstore, and they find a crate under the stairs, and they open it, and it's got old comic books in it that George developed, and they were 3D.
Oh, wow.
So the kid pulls out the 3D glasses and puts the glasses on, and there's a zombie on the cover. And unbeknownst to everybody, the zombie comes off of the cover and is now walking around the store. But you can only see it if you have the 3D glasses on.
Ooh.
So, invisible zombies. So they walk around the corner and there's a guy in midair, blood, and he's being held up by some invisible force, and the kid puts the glasses on. It's like, holy crap. So we did an invisible zombie episode.
Oh, that's amazing.
Creepshow. So there you go. You're like, yeah, I've seen it all with zombies. I'm like, no, I came up with a new idea. Invisible zombie.
That's awesome.
And by the way, I unleashed a bunch of them downstairs. When you hear screaming and people flailing, it's invisible zombies.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Just say that.
So, yeah, really.
That's how.
Please, we've had enough. A complete enough. So, why don't we, before we open up the question, because how many people got questions? I'm sure it's a lot, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, how about who doesn't have a question?
who doesn't have a question? You can leave now. Only care. Anyway, so tell us about how you got started real quick, and then we'll open it up and talk about whatever anybody wants to talk to.
Okay, so I started the same way all of you did. I've watched horror movies when I was growing up. That we didn't. VCRs just came about when I was probably 12 or 13 years old. So the real challenge was, when you were a horror fan at my age, and some of these older folks know, you had to work at it. You had to find that one screening of Horror of Dracula. You'd get your TV guide and you'd circle it. If it was on at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning, then you were literally throwing cold water on your face at 2 a.m. to stay awake, because you didn't have the opportunity to see it again. So that level of commitment of I have to stay up, and reading Famous Monsters magazine, which was the only magazine until '79 when Fangoria came out. So to be a horror fan, you had to really work at it, and I really believe that that's what bonded everyone. Quentin and Guillermo del Toro, and even people like Tom Hanks, who loved Ray Harryhausen.
Monster kids.
All these monster kids, we all had that same upbringing. If you wanted it, you had to fight for it. So the fact that now we get to celebrate it at these conventions, and you can look on your phone in 30 seconds and find it, it does take some of the fun out of it because it's so easily accessible, but it creates this world where everybody can really can embrace it. So that's kind of how I got into it. I loved horror movies, and I grew up in Pittsburgh, the mecca of the horror movie at the time. And
Chili Billy.
Bill Cardille. I have a Chiller Theater shirt that I made. Literally, it was like an ad from the TV Guide. So, my uncle also was an actor and knew George, and my uncle was cast in The Crazies as Deputy Slade, I think he gave himself a name. A lot of extras in movies go, they give themselves characters and backstories. Anyway, so when I met George finally, I said, my Uncle Sam, my uncle, and that's how George said, you should come down to the office and visit. So I would, as soon as I got my driver's license, I would drive down 247 Fort Pitt Boulevard in Pittsburgh, and I would visit. And then Creepshow came about in 1980, I think they shot summer of 1980, and he said, hey, you want a job as a production assistant? I'm like, getting ready to go away to college, but thanks. But if you want to visit, come visit. So I visited the set of Creepshow a lot. Cut to 4 years later, I go down to have lunch with George. He said, hey, we just got a green light on Day of the Dead. And I went, and he said, do you want a job? And I'm like, hold that thought. So I drove home, got a speeding ticket on the way home, and told my parents, I'm like, hey, I want to take a semester off of college, and I'm going to go work on this movie. And I still have, my dorm room probably still has all my shit in it. I don't even remember if I took anything. I was like, bye.
Well, that's just it. When George says, hey, you want to come do something, you don't waste time.
No,
like,
and
I'm slingshotting myself there if I have to be.
And the funny thing about it with George was he always felt bad. Yeah. Like, I think he felt like he steered me wrong. Like, this is Greg Nicotero. He really should have been a doctor. Finally, I said, George, it's been 20 years. You can drop the I should have been a doctor thing. I think I'm doing okay. So, hey.
You have a doctor name.
What's that?
I do have a doctor.
Well, my dad's a doctor. So if you got kidney problems, Dr. Nicotero. So it's kind of.
All right, let's open it up to the crowd. Who has a question?
I saw one hand up way back there real quick.
Oh, my man. Greg, you're the king, man.
Woo, thanks.
You like Iron Maiden?
Yes. That was the question?
That was the best damn question ever.
Right. All right, but wait, do you like Iron Maiden?
My favorite band.
All right. I was waiting for you to go, I just wanted to see if you like it.
Okay,
Yes.
so there you go.
Yeah, my dad's a doctor. Next question.
Next question.
Okay, so you talk about the idea of the invisible zombies, but I love that it also sort of gives an homage to a combination of From Beyond meets like a zombie movie meets They Live.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought of the They Live connection, but I just was really excited about it. Of course, the funny thing is the network's like, yeah, we hate this idea. So I'm like, great, I'm doing it. I'm the worst. I'm the worst, because if somebody tells me, like, I just directed an episode that I absolutely love. James Flanagan wrote it, who wrote Midnight Mass.
Yes.
And Usher, I loved Midnight Mass. So I reached out to him and I said, hey man, I'd love to, Mike's his brother. Mike's the director and James is the writer.
Don't think you're going to catch, Greg.
No. That was a question. By the way, that was your second question. But I really, really loved his writing. I loved the writing in Midnight Mass. I just thought it was fantastic. So I reached out and said, hey, I'm doing season 4 of Creepshow. Do you have any stories? And he's like, it's not really my medium, man. Sorry, but thanks. And then like 20 minutes later, he calls me back and wait, I got a story. So I cast Samantha Sloyan, who was in Midnight Mass, and it's an excellent, excellent episode called 20 Minutes with Cassandra. This girl comes home from work, walks in, grabs a glass of wine, knock on the door, she opens the door, this woman runs in and goes, you're gonna die in 20 minutes. That's the premise of the episode. Love the episode. Did my first cut, it's like 35 minutes, and the network watched it and they're like, oh my God, it's so great. But you should cut 10 minutes out. So I'm like, nah. I like it the way it is. I'm very attached to the things that I do. Creatively, when you put your heart and soul into something, which I really do. I really do feel that my heart and my soul and everything, I put it into something. So I get defensive and someone's like, we should see less of the monster. I'm like, what? Why would we see it's the monster? People want to see the monster. And then I'll cut a few frames. I'm like, yeah, they were right. And then it pisses me off because I realize that I'm very protective creatively of what I do. I know.
Yeah, but that's good.
But that's a great, that's a great word, rebellious, because if you really think about the genre that started this whole movement, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Night of the Living Dead, Last House on the Left, Hills Have Eyes, those movies were all rebellious. Those were made by filmmakers that everybody said, nobody wants to see that. Don't make that movie, it's too gory. So that's a perfect word to describe what we do. We're all rebellious. And by the way, when I was young, and we would go to conventions, like, when I was in high school, nobody liked me. Like, people thought I was the weird kid who loved horror movies. And Rush and Leonard Skinner. So I would like wear my Leonard Skinner t-shirt and I'd talk about horror movies and people would
Iron Maiden t-shirt.
I didn't have an Iron Maiden. Oh, he left already. He got his question answered. He's like, I'm done.
Nicotero likes Iron Maiden. I'm going right
He
for Twitter.
literally dropped his mic and left. No, but I mean, so many people talk about horror stuff, but when I was younger, it wasn't cool to like horror movies. You would go and there'd be 3 people in the theater, and that was it. So now the fact that it's cool to like horror stuff, and it hasn't become mainstream because we still wear our Black Misfit t-shirts, and we still watch like the goriest shit, and everybody's sick. You do what?
Gory stuff.
Good. All right. You really want to talk.